So there is this question regarding free will. About this Sakshi bhav you are speaking, the extent to which I understood it is that the body, the senses, are not the true Sakshi. Scientifically speaking, it is clear to an ordinary mind that the impulses travel through nerves of various senses and then go to the processing center where they get deciphered. Now, knowing self as pure consciousness is not possible by asking questions, but rather experience. How does knowing self liberate one? The idea of liberation seems to me like just live this moment fully, and when death comes, live that fully too, but joyously. This type of living is liberated living. Is liberated living a liberation everybody talking about? Or it is something different, like a bigger prakriti of cycle of birth and death? So this is the question from Vishal. The extent to which I understood it is that the body senses are not the true Sakshi. That is quite true. Scientifically speaking, it is clear to an ordinary mind that the impulses travel through nerves of various senses and then go to the processing center where they get deciphered. Scientifically speaking, the free will is a delusion. And this is a fact established in religious or in spiritual field long time ago. Vedanta says that the free will is a misconcept. The will can never be free, because will is also part of the mind. In Indian tradition or in Indian spiritual tradition, the mind is not just chitta or mind stuff. It is classified according to the function as mana, buddhi, chitta, ahankar. 4 constituents based on the function. Now, when we talk about free will, it is nothing but an intellectual assertion which is in the domain of the mind, which is not free. That which is there behind the mind is free, which is the self. So, the will that comes to us through the intellect or the buddhi, which is of the nature of nischayatmika, means I will do this or I will not do this. That is the function of buddhi. Knowing self as pure consciousness is not possible by asking question, but rather experience. So this experience is not the type of experience that we usually have through the senses. So what he is talking about as the impulses traveling through the nerves and the brain centers, deciphering it, that is the common way of perception, which is limited by various types of conditioning. The way brain deciphers depends on what kind of previous knowledge it has to compare. So based on that, it arrives at a conclusion which we call knowledge. So in that sense, all knowledge is limited. That's why Sri Ramakrishna says, where there is knowledge, there is ignorance. So then he comes to the question, how does knowing self liberate one? So knowing self is not this kind of a knowledge, how we have sensory experiences. In normal sensory perception, when we say we know something, what we are doing is, it's an abstraction. We limit what we perceive compared with our previous understanding, and we say that we know it. For example, if somebody has never seen this object, he may say, I do not know. But if someone has seen a mouse, a computer mouse, then when he or she perceives this, the brain will recognize it by comparing it with the previous knowledge about a mouse and give you a sense of knowledge. And we say, I know what it is, and it is a mouse. So by saying that I know what it is, we are actually limiting this within the field of our knowledge, which is based on past. But the perception itself is not limited by knowledge. The way a Brahmagyani would see this is the same way we see. Only our limited concepts are not there in the mind of a Brahmagyani. He too will call it a mouse for all transactional purpose, but he or she doesn't limit this to a knowledge based on the past. It allows it to be, because his realization has made him realize that we cannot know anything in its absolute sense. Nobody can say, I know what I'm perceiving completely. So for transactional purpose, we limit it and we deal with daily life. So how does knowing self liberate one? Knowing the self is not a sensory knowledge. To know self is to be the self. There is no knower. Like in ordinary case, when I say, I know this microphone, there is a knower sitting here. But that knower is not the one which knows the self. We are in ordinary life totally identified with this person who is the knower of sensory data. But this person, when he or she dissolves, in the sense, our identity shifts from being this person to being the self. That is called self-knowledge. And it is an irreversible and radical transformation. Once you recognize it, you cannot unsee it, or you cannot go back to ignorance. Even if one wants to be ignorant, he cannot be. After the realization of the self. So, knowing the self is to be the self. Brahmavid Brahmaiva bhavati, says the scriptures. The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. And it is not becoming in the sense of water becoming ice or someone changing the state. It is a recognition of your true self. We falsely identify ourselves to be a person separate from the rest of the world, which we can call Maya or illusion or delusion or ignorance. We ignore the reality, so we can call it ignorance. And when ignorance is removed, that is the end of all that we can do. And like Kathopanishad says, the Atman, the one whom the Atman chooses, only that person is liberated. So, the individual self is not the one who liberates himself. So, all we can do is exert our utmost and find out whether we're really at any point of time whether we were not self. And when we assert ourselves to the maximum, we find that we were never a separate individual. In fact, the very word individual means that which cannot be divided. So our true individuality lies in Brahman, or the One, or Advitiya, not two. The idea of liberation seems to me like just live this moment fully. Of course, living the moment fully, but that is not the same as enjoying this moment, whatever we can, let's enjoy. No, that is not the point. Because all sense of enjoyments come from a lack of fulfillment. We sense a lack, and only from that desires spring up. So whatever desires that spring up in our minds has its foundation in this lack, that sense of incompleteness, which is the nature of Jiva, or this limited self that we think we are. So through whatever means, when we find out, by self-inquiry or by praying to God through devotion, by trying to meditate on something which is not limited, meditating on God and imagining that God is unlimited, even if we don't have any concept of what it means, it will reveal itself. It, he, she. You can say the Divine Mother or Brahman. It's not a person, it's not a human being, it's just being. And it will reveal itself. So that is another path. So whichever path we follow, the idea is to find out who we truly are. Is liberated living a liberation everybody talking about, or it is something different? I'm not sure what you mean but when you say what everybody is talking about. Liberated living is just living, not you choosing to live. It is living is happening, and living as in life which has no opposite. Not life and death, but it's like birth and death. You become the witness of whatever is happening. You become like the sky in which the clouds of thoughts and events are coming and going, but the sky is unaffected. You do not choose to become unaffected. Your very nature itself becomes the light of awareness. The light of awareness is the light in the sense of whatever it shines upon, it illumines. And the difference between an ordinary light and the light of awareness is that this is self-luminous, means it is aware of itself. The moment an idea flashes, immediately you are aware of it. So that is also a reflection. That is not the real thing. That's also a reflection of your true nature, of existence, knowledge, bliss absolute. Sat Chit Ananda. Why I said it is a reflection? Because this waking state knower is not there in deep sleep. So this person is not there when you are in deep sleep. Even in dream, you identify as someone else having an experience. But there is this constant thread. When you dream and when you wake up, you do not say somebody else was dreaming. When you were 5 years old, you had an ice cream. Now, if you look, your body has changed, your mind has changed, but still you do not think that somebody else ate that ice cream. You go back and say, it is I. So there is that constant feeling of I-ness, even in this limited self, which is a reflection. It is not the true one. Because if it was the true one, then in case of people who have amnesia, fail to recognize people, yet they never think that I'm not there. It's just that memory-based knowledge somehow gets deleted, or those brain centers get damaged, so they cannot recollect. If our I is dependent on memory, it's a very fragile thing. So what we can truly say, even right now, truly if we say, who am I, without depending on memory, we cannot say much. We can only say, we are being, and we are aware that we are being, and there is this natural bliss of contentment until the next desire comes up. So when I told you last time that to your last question, that try to be in the Sakshi bhav, so this sense of contentment can be practiced, because this is your nearest approximation to who you really are. And when, by the grace of Atman, by the grace of Brahman, by the grace of God, this limited self dissolves completely, then you are what you are, what you always were, Sat Chid Ananda. And then, if the body still remains, then we call that person Jivan Mukta, liberated while living. And if in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the body in 21 days, for an ordinary jiva, Sri Ramakrishna says, in 21 days, the pranas leave the body. Like a bigger prakriti of cycle of birth and death. This cycle of birth and death is in the prakriti, in matter, if we can say so. But we are eternally different from this cycle. So others seemingly think that they are moving towards a future, and they go round and round and round, while you, as a liberated being, is stepping aside from this movement and realizes that even others are not actually moving. It's like the wave realizing the depth of the ocean. So as a wave, it is limited, and it may even compete with other waves. It may have some complexes, like I'm a small wave, there is a bigger wave, etc. But when the wave realizes its ocean nature, then either it can continue to be the wave, still enjoy the wave identity, or it will merge in the ocean forever. In fact, the more we speak about it, more we are going farther away from truth. Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. That's how scriptures describe. Even words and the mind, the words together with the mind fall back without being able to describe the truth. And with regard to free will that I mentioned in the beginning, scientific experiments have proved that even before that person is aware of what he is going to do next, the brain centers are already deciding it. I'm not an expert in scientific terms, so I would refrain from explaining it further. It's just that when Sarvapriyananda ji Maharaj was our Acharya in training center, about a decade ago, he had shown us a video where they are trying to demonstrate this free will, the scientists. So they connected these sensors, and the person was asked to make a choice of A or B. There were two buttons. And they found, to their surprise, that even before he made the choice, that center was getting lit up. That, okay, next he's going to press B, or next he's going to press A. In fact, few seconds after that decision was made, he was conscious of it. So that itself proves that this limited sense of person, which we think we are deciding, doesn't have any free will. I'm not sure how far the scientific experiments have progressed ever since, but even in scientific world, the notion of free will is being questioned. And Swami Vivekananda clearly says that free will is a misnomer. The will can never be free. That which is free is beyond the will. So when I said being in the present moment and being neutral, all we are trying to do is aligning ourselves, our limited self, to act and behave like our real nature. And no, as Holy Mother says, and no spiritual practice can give you God. Spiritual practices reduce the effect of karma or past actions on our bearing. So all this identification and all these particles that make up our body, all this is due to our past karma. And that will be loosened. And then the self will shine forth by the grace of God. She says, only by grace of God one can be liberated. But we can minimize our suffering because of our wrong and ignorant identity. That can be removed by spiritual practices. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat.